Hey everyone, welcome back to another HR Heretics show today. I am so excited to welcome Lucy Adams. We have been, I think, trying to schedule this for about 5 months, Lucy, if I recall.
I think that's about right.
Love it. Lucy joins us right outside of London. What's your town's name again?
It's a place called Stockbridge. So imagine those Jane Austen films, you know? It's like that.
I love that. I've only been to London, so I fascinate about kind of spending time outside.
Well, I was born in London and lived most of my adult life in London. So we moved here about 3 years and it kind of freaks me out. You know, things close at 5 o'clock. They close for lunch. They close at half day on a Wednesday. It's just unreal.
How does the economy work? That doesn't even make sense to me.
I don't know. I really don't know. But, you know, coming from a place which never sleeps, you know, which never closes, I think people just go home and spend time with their families and have hobbies and things, which in London you just don't have.
They learn to do things, you know, opposite of how we do things is basically what's the gist there, which is why I'd love to go there. But yeah, so Lucy, you've been doing this for, almost 30 years, I'd say, plus or minus, looking at your background.
That makes me feel old.
Yeah, it's great. Roles all over the place, HR leader roles at different industries and sectors. And for the last 11 years, you've been running Disruptive HR, which is a term that we're going to pull apart today to kind of think about how you think about that word, what it means, what you're seeing out in the market, what you've learned for our audience. And HR roles you've had before this, I have to call it out, is BBC, which I love. You were an HR leader at BBC out in London, and I'm a huge Ab Fab fan. Absolutely fabulous. So I have to ask if you met either of those two.
No, I didn't. It had kind of stopped recording by the time I worked there. But yeah, I mean, it's just an amazing place. You know, I mean, anyone who grew up in Britain in the kind of, 70s and 80s, it was the backdrop to your life, right? So whether it be the popular music charts that we'd listen to on a Sunday night, or whether it would be the David Attenborough wildlife stuff that we'd watch as a family, whether, I'm a football fan, not your kind of football, our kind of football, soccer, you call it, don't you? So that was kind of a classic, must see, must watch, sitting down watching Match of the Day with my dad. So to get the opportunity to go and work at this place that I had loved all my life was incredible. And it was incredible, but it's one of those jobs you absolutely love and never want to do again. It's you're in the public spotlight, you're in the media, and in HR we're not kind of used to that. I mean, I remember my kind of onboarding, I had to meet with the head of PR and communications, and he's like, right, tell me straight away, have you got a cocaine habit? I'm like, what? I was like, no. He said, great, as long as we know. And have you got an industrial size shredder? Because the press are going to go through your bins. It's like, right, great, yeah. So it was like no other role I've ever had. It was fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
I love that. I am such a BBC geek and London. And I mean, I have Arsenal, right behind me here. You can see the Arsenal flag under here.
Oh, well, I'm a Chelsea fan, so that immediately puts it. Where's the connection with Arsenal?
I guess I should have saved that for the end. Now it's contentious. No, I just always liked them. So, yeah, always been a fan of Arsenal. But so yes, so BBC is great. I'm so excited to have you here. But I'd love to start with Disruptive HR. Tell us about how maybe the years leading up to you thinking you want to do this and why you chose that word.
Yeah, I mean, as you pointed out, I'm kind of long in the tooth HR director, done that role for most of my professional career, and I kind of always had slight reservations that the stuff we were doing wasn't really working or wasn't really having the impact. I remember at the BBC going along and talking to them about the fact that it was the news division. And I was like, great guys, we've simplified the performance management process. We're only going to rate people out of 3 rather than 5, and you can do it all on one page. And I was thinking, they're going to love this. And they're like, why do you keep coming along and depressing us? And I was thinking, this is meant to be good stuff. This is meant to be stuff that's going to help you with your team and improve performance. And so there's always been those kind of reservations. And it was really during my time at the BBC where we were going through, as many organizations, your listeners will all be going through significant change, whether it be digital or, changing workplace expectations, etc. And there was I still doing HR like I'd done in the 1990s. So by the time my kind of stint at the BBC was coming to an end, myself and my co-founder, Karen Moran, we went for a very long lunch in Covent Garden. And we're like, look, can we take our shared frustrations and do something with this? Get off our backsides and actually come up with ways in which HR could be fit for a disrupted world. So that's where disruptive HR comes from. And that's what we've been doing for the last 10, 11 years. It's been amazing. I love it. I still love it because we get to work with HR professionals who are open and curious. You don't come to disruptive HR if you've got a closed mind and you're happy with the way things are. You come to us if you're interested in or believe that HR needs to be different. So yes, that's what we do.
So Lucy, I want to ask you about that because, you started the business 10, 11 years ago. And I do think at that time, there was this yearning for change within HR to essentially go from a compliance and legal function to more of like a strategic business partner function. And I think you guys nailed the timing, right? Like everyone was talking. And so I think a lot of that has actually happened and we've seen kind of this next era. But to your point there on, people don't come to disruptive HR who don't want change. I actually am experiencing something else in the space right now, which is I'm calling it like this homogeny of thinking within HR, which is there actually is resistance to change. There's resistance now to hearing outside opinions that challenge, especially what we were doing, call it in the 2020 to 2023 timeframe. Do you agree with that?
There's a lot in what you've said. So just to kind of unpack and maybe challenge a little bit, I don't think that the transition to strategic business partner was ever nailed. I still meet with a lot of HR professionals who are struggling to make that transition. So I think there is still an appetite for change. What I do think, where I do agree with you, is that we made some step changes as a result of the crisis around COVID. Understandably, whether that be, the whole kind of working from home or working flexibly, a level of trust because we had to, because we couldn't see people. So we were trusting them, improvements in the way that we were communicating virtually and asynchronous communication, really helping with people who were working both remotely, but also across global organizations. So I think we made some really important step changes, which I'm now seeing being rowed back on. So, the leaders who are coming out and saying everybody back into the office, we need to see you, to trust you. That I think is a real shame because I think we did make some step changes, which perhaps weren't as solidified and they didn't stick.
But is it a real shame? Like, I mean, I get it personally that I want to work remotely and like that's a choice for me. But what Kelli and I always talk about, along with one of our friends, Colleen McCreary, is the number one thing that's important is that companies define themselves. And if a company defines themselves as having an in-office presence, I'm not sure if like the broad stroke of saying like this is not okay, or we're now as a field we're taking steps back. I'm not sure if that applies. Like, what do you think about that?
Well, what I think is that it's a personal choice, ideally, and that I think employees are grown-ups, supposedly, and leaders are supposedly grown-ups, and that the most progressive approaches are where you as a leader sit down with your team and say, what works for us as individuals, what works for the client, what works for what we're doing in terms of the work at the moment. So I love Swiss Re. They have an expression which is own the way you work. And that is, you're a grown-up. You know what you've got to deliver. You know the implications for the team. You know what's your social or caring obligations. Let's have a conversation and see what works. You're not going to get everything you want necessarily because you're not working in isolation. but let's have a grown-up conversation and find something that can work. So I think it's about that personal choice rather than, I don't think working from home is good, working in the office is bad. It depends on the individual, what the team's got going on, what the clients need. And I think for some people, working in an office all the time is great, and that's what they want, or that's what the clients need. But I think it's this blanket approach. And so I think what we did was in HR, we went for the 2 days out the office, 3 days in, which is just kind of, it doesn't mean anything. You know, you've got people who are now having to go in and commute and sit there and do their emails because it's an in-office day, rather than what defines the work, what's needed by the individuals. There's a UK public sector body, but they say, you know, we come together when it has value and purpose. And that's a judgment call and through discussion rather than this blanket approach, because we don't trust managers to be able to have a conversation or explain their reasoning for why they want people in. So no, I'm not a kind of, you know, all working from home is good and all working in the office is bad. But I do think that people want and benefit from a degree of autonomy, and that autonomy and control over how, when, where I work can be a really powerful piece of engagement.
Yeah, I mean, to Nolan's point, Lucy, we have talked about this a lot. We've stretched it. We've looked at all the angles. I mean, we've talking about it for 18 months since this podcast launched. And some of the hypotheses that we have is that a lot of folks struggle with this RTO, this remote, this hybrid in office concept, because they do try to blanket. They kind of follow the leader and then go back, and they're not really secure in their identity, and the clarity of that identity and the why. Are you seeing that across the clients you work with? What are you telling them?
Yeah, no, it's a real mix. And there's the full spectrum between, everybody back in the office, the kind of classic, we'll let you work from home some of the time, 2 to 3 days without any real clarification about why 2 to 3 days. And then we've got the more progressive, more grown-up organizations that are saying, look, we're not going to mandate this from the center. Actually, sit down. So Arkiva is an engineering company. And the HR team there said, look, we're not going to mandate when you work or how you work or where you work. But what we do expect you to do is have a conversation and consider these points about, the nature of the work. Where can we build in flexibility? And that's really positive because it's giving a degree of control without this kind of centralized policy. I think the identity point is an interesting one, because I think sometimes we can major on this idea that culture and identity comes from an office or a physical presence. In reality, most organizations have multiple cultures depending on the team or the work that they're doing. We just take the BBC, the culture in journalism and the news guys was incredibly different to television or radio or online. I think it needs to be much more granular than this idea that we have an identity and you must come in or you don't have to come in. I think it's much more around the work, the individuals, the relationships, what needs to get done, and what's most appropriate for that.
Do you think that holds for smaller companies?
Yeah, I do. I think in some ways, I think it's probably, just take my own company. We're a small company. There are 9 of us, and we've never had an office. We have somebody who's in the Isle of Orkney, which is in Scotland, which takes you 14 hours to get to. We have somebody in Malaga. We have people spread around the UK. We've never had an office, but I would say we've got a very strong identity. I think the identity comes from the way you make decisions, the way you treat people, the way you do business. I don't think we need an office for that. I think that comes through conversation, judgment calls, behaviors.
Yeah, you've used the word trust a few times, and I'm curious. Like, do you think that that's the primary driver of some of the behaviors we've seen over the last couple of years?
Lack of trust.
Exactly.
Yeah, I find this really frustrating. I think so much of what HR does is because we don't trust managers to manage, and I don't think that has moved on. Particularly whenever, we speak to thousands of HR people every year. And if you ask them kind of what's their number one issue, it's we have poor managers with poor capability. But their response to that is very much around, well, let's design a process that makes them do certain things, and we can feel better because they're managing performance, because they're doing a performance management review where they're giving someone a grade, or we can feel better that they're doing engagement because they're doing an annual engagement survey and completing their cascade action plan. Or we can feel better about talent management because we're doing an annual talent review and making them do this stuff. Unfortunately, a lot of the processes that we make them do don't actually generate the things we want. They don't improve performance and motivation. They don't actually help with talent mobility. They don't improve engagement. So I think that HR spends a lot of time compensating for poor managers, and we don't trust them to manage. And so much of what we do with employees is because it's not that we don't trust employees, actually, it's we don't trust a few. We don't trust a few rogue employees, but we design our policies and our rules around the lowest common denominator. And I think increasingly HR people are struggling with how to respond to the calls that come from leadership. So client of ours, stupid example, but a client of ours, they had this great thing where they could bring their dog to work, right? So it was lovely. Everybody enjoyed it. It was a real benefit. One day a dog was brought in that had fleas. And the first thing that they do is, right, HR, design me a policy about dogs with fleas, and the whole, the joy sucked out of it, designing around one individual. We see this more and more, I think. And I think HR struggles with how to push back on that and how to reinforce the fact that we don't want to design around the lowest common denominator. Trust is so important. If you read around it, if you feel trusted, you are more likely to be able to embrace change, to challenge the status quo, to be curious, to be open, all the things we need in a disrupted world. If we don't trust, then what we aim for is passivity, compliance. People wait to be told, they wait to be given permission. And I don't think that sets our businesses up for success. And if in HR our role is to equip our organizations so that they can cope and thrive in a disrupted world, then I think trust at the root of that is fundamental. If you don't trust somebody, deal with the individual.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
If you're the decision maker at your company, we have great news for you, for your HR organization, and for your employees. A new and future forward way to do health benefits is here from Thatch. Not only do your employees get better health benefits with Thatch, but you save an average of $1,620 per employee per year. That's right, you can save over $1,600 per employee per year. Plus, Thatch reduces the time the HR team spend administering benefits. Businesses all over the country love Thatch's breakthrough approach. Rather than a wasteful, one-size-fits-all plan, Thatch empowers their employees by letting them customize their own benefits plan. You save money and time while providing employees with better health benefits, which works better for everyone. Book a demo with Thatch and we'll send you a $100 gift card. Visit thatch.ai/HR to book a demo for your gift card. That's thatch.ai/HR.
Your workforce is your organization's greatest strength and often its largest single expense. But without the right tools, understanding where your workforce spend is going or how it impacts your bottom line can be a challenge. That's where Planful comes in. With Planful, HR and finance teams get the clarity they need to make smarter workforce decisions, gain real-time visibility into workforce fluctuations, forecast with confidence, and adjust talent acquisition plans collaboratively based on costs today and into the future. No more guesswork, just data-driven insights to help you plan with accuracy. And the best part, Planful is fast and easy to implement, so you can be up and running in weeks, not months, with minimal IT support. Plus, as your company grows, Planful grows with you, providing endless runway for strategic workforce planning at any scale. Ready to take your workforce planning to the next level? Join over 1,500 organizations already using Planful. Visit planful.com/heretics to learn more. How, just to be true to the heretic name, the cynics might be like, okay, That's wonderful, Lucy. How many organizations do you get over that hump? Because that sounds like what Nolan accuses me of a lot is utopia. That's great. Like, how successful is that? How is that looking out in your client base? And I wrote this down. I have to ask you, do you see a difference with UK based companies versus the US?
Before you answer, Lucy, sorry, just before you, just an example on the dog thing. So we had this similar policy at a company I worked at, and it was great for many years until somebody brought a dog that took a dump in the office. It smelled all day long. And then it's like, well, now we don't want this again, right? And it's like, this is a place of business. And so what we did was we actually removed that policy. And I agree, like, it's like, it is utopic, right, Kelli, to like try and design policies around people like who you do trust. But then once it gets fractured and it impacts the business, you don't want to deal with it again. So I agree with Kelli, but sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to pick up your point, and then I'll come back to Kelly's question. I think you have to look at the opportunity cost that you are missing out on if you design around the minority. So if you're creating an environment where you're screaming at your people, we don't actually trust you, even though there's no proof that they are going to do anything wrong. The vast majority of us want to come to work, to behave decently, do a decent job. I'm not saying we're all stars, but I think the vast majority of people actually want to come to work and do a decent job. And if you as an employer are saying you don't trust the majority of your people, what are you doing? Paying them, trusting them with clients, trusting them with company property? Why aren't you dealing with those individuals rather than subjecting the vast majority of the workforce to policies? I remember working with a company. They advised government on nuclear strategy. These are serious-minded, amazing individuals advising governments on nuclear strategy, but they weren't trusted to have the keys to the stationery cupboard. It's like, come on, we've got to kind of get real here. What are we missing out by creating an environment that tells us we don't trust? And I think we're missing out on loads. If you look at those organizations that have a high trust environment, then on every measure, productivity, innovation, even stress levels, they go in the right direction, the KPIs. And if you think about the person that you enjoyed working for the most, chances are they would say, Nolan, I trust you. Use your judgment. So in answer to Kelly's question, again, it's mixed. I think that, and I'll come to the US UK point in a bit, but I think what we see is some organizations really trying, and they are doing things like saying, actually, we're not going to sit you down and give you a performance rating. It's up to you as an individual to seek out feedback. And own that for yourself because you're a grown up and we trust you to do that. We're seeing it happening with policies like bereavement leave. Instead of this awful, you can have 2 days for a close relative and 1 day for a cousin. It's actually saying, like Priscat, say, take the time you need. We've got your back. And leaders know which individual in their team, whose grandma's died for the 6th time that year versus the one that is genuinely bereft, who's been a great employee. So I think it's definitely some organizations are making lots of headway. If you look at Standard Chartered, they went through their entire employee manual and they said, let's review every policy with the lens of, does this increase levels of innovation in our people? Does it make them feel like they belong? And they took out a load of stuff. We see some of the more, I suppose, junior organizations like HubSpot, where they say, we're not going to swamp you with policies. We just have 3 words: use good judgment. So it's definitely there in some organizations. I don't see a massive difference between the UK and the US. I'd see a difference in sectors. I think there is a strong sectoral piece. So if you work in a sector that is highly regulated, so banking or healthcare, there is a kind of in your DNA, or you're subjected to external regulation that might ask you for these policies and might ask you for these processes, whereas some sectors aren't as constrained and are able to be a little bit freer. So I think, it's mixed, absolutely. But in my view, the smarter, more progressive organizations are saying, as an HR function, we don't want to spend our time monitoring policies. We don't want to spend our time spoon feeding our employees. Actually, what we want to do is equip our people to be fit for a disrupted world. And that means a very different set of solutions from us.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
I must admit, I used to believe that AI didn't actually exist in recruiting or HR. That is until my friend Heather Doche, who leads talent at Signalfire, told me to check out Metaview. I got into the product and was like, wow, AI actually does exist in recruiting, and this product is sick. Metaview is the world's #1 AI scribe built specifically for recruiting. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. I've seen firsthand how tough it can be to extract consistently high-quality data from candidate conversations. I've been in debriefs where interviewers told us about their feelings instead of what actually happened in the interview. And I've seen VPs and CEOs block hires because they didn't learn anything from skeleton scorecards. Metaview changes everything. With perfect notes from every conversation, your people can focus on creating a human connection with candidates, and they can save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Metaview covers all your compliance needs, works with all your existing tools, and takes less than 3 minutes to set up. Join talent leaders at organizations like Brex, Deal, HelloFresh, and Quora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaview.ai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts. Tell them that me and Kelli sent you. Or you could just go to their website and get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI-enabled in minutes.
You wrote an article around the HRBP role recently. And you posed a question, which is like, is this the toughest role in HR? So can you just kind of like lay out the premise for the article and tell the audience what it was about?
Yeah, I mean, I just really feel for HR business partners. I've done that role, and we meet lots of HR business partners who are trying to meet so many needs on so many fronts. So I'm not saying the other roles in HR aren't tough. Of course they are. But as an HR business partner, you are torn between the needs of the group and your CPO and your centers of expertise who are trying to push the latest kind of initiative. You're trying to meet the needs of your business unit. And quite often they're the ones paying your salary. They're your clients. So do you upset them? You're trying to be, even though you've got centers of expertise, you're trying or expected to have a knowledge of all areas of HR, from reward through to learning and development and so on. And I don't think we have equipped business partners with the necessary skills. I think we focused a lot on employee relations, whereas actually I think the role is much more of a judgment role. It's about a coaching and facilitation role rather than being the expert who everybody comes to for the answer. Tell me what I should do. I think the best HR business partners are the ones that are saying, tell me what it is you're trying to achieve. What decision would you have got to if I wasn't here? Let me kind of think through how we can achieve that. And that takes judgment and experience. And there's no kind of clear manual for that. Yeah, of course, there's the law. But actually, a lot of what business partners are doing is not quoting policy or telling them the law. They're thinking, what's the capability of this leader? What's the context here? What's the precedent? How confident am I that they'd be able to kind of follow this through? What are they not asking me? What are they not telling me? So I think the business partner role is one that requires a huge amount of judgment, wisdom, commerciality, obviously, but they're also fighting on so many fronts. So that's where the premise of the article came from.
So I totally agree with you that I don't think HRBPs, for the most part, are equipped with the skills to do the job well. And, the best one that I've ever been around, the thing that she did is exactly what you're saying, which is kind of like working backwards from like, what is our goal here? Like, what are we trying to accomplish? And then deconstructing those things and then, trying to cover the person's blind spots. If I think in the context of it's 2025 right now, how should we organize and how should we think about this role and where should this role sit in the business? Kelli, I'll be honest, I'm starting to think about like actually rolling this up through the actual business. And I'm actually thinking this is more of like, it's kind of like a chief of staff. Like a good chief of staff does this work. And I feel like calling somebody an HRBP, it's just like immediately putting that title on somebody makes it impossible because of exactly what you said, Lucy, right? They have served many masters. Like they have to look out for themselves, right? There just is there's no winning in that role right now. And we're getting so much pushback from the business on, well, what is actually HR accomplishing here? Are they helping, lubricate the machine, or are they actually adding friction and slowing things down? And so I'm curious to get your take on that, Lucy. Like, it feels to me that in 2025, this might actually be better served as like a chief of staff who is running this moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it quite often, almost like an account director role, an account manager, somebody that actually is not necessarily doing all the work, but is there pulling in expertise where it's needed. They know that part of the business inside out, so they're able to ask the great questions, and then they pull together the solution that works. I think the business partner, again, another client of ours, big retail organization, the chief exec was sat down with the HR director and going, what is this, a business partner? And it's like, well, it's like somebody that helps with HR. And it's like, why are you calling it a business partner? It's almost apologetic, isn't it? It's that kind of lacking in confidence. I need to impress about what I'm there to do. I don't think it's necessarily an impossible role, but I think the caliber of people going into it needs to be a lot higher than perhaps we see. I think that unfortunately people who have only done policy or process work and have come from a more administrative background, they're suddenly told, right, you're now a strategic business partner. And as an HR director myself, a lot of the people who worked in my team in that role, they got their kicks from ensuring compliance, helping managers. They worked really hard, and their motivation came from a good place. They wanted to help. But ultimately, they're not there to help. They're there to create the conditions where people can do their best work. And that's very different. That's a very different ask. And that means pushing back to the centers of expertise. So it's stakeholder management. It's about providing insights to leaders and managers about their people, and then coaching them in the best way of getting the right answers and the right solutions for those people. So that's an ability to work not in a safe place of, I've got my policy, I've got my process, and I'm just going to make you do it, and I'm going to feel good because I've got 95% completion of appraisals, or I've got my talent 9-box grids completed. It's actually messier and grayer. And I think great HR is really messy. And I don't think we should be apologetic for that. I think we've tried so much to emulate finance, with our language like human capital and return on investment. And actually, I think it is in the gray. Great HR is messy and it's not perfect. And I think, our superpower is that we get people, and people are messy. And have you ever watched Billions? Do you remember the HBO series Billions? Oh, so the kind of psychologist character. To me, she's the best HR person. She is super bright. She is all about performance and the individuals, but she embraces the fact she knows people. I'm not saying we all should become psychologists, but I think we could lose some of the process, lose some of the policy, and say, actually, what does help someone improve their performance? It's certainly not giving them a rating at the end of the year. It's about small course corrections. How do we improve engagement? It's not about doing an annual survey or, kind of initiatives. It's actually about people feeling that they're trusted and given flexibility. It's about, so what what are we doing around reward? We're still churning out bonuses, which we know do not surprise and delight, do not make people feel good. Yeah, I'm kind of getting what I'm entitled to, or it's a bit less than last year, so I'm a bit hacked off. But we know people. You ask them what's the best reward they ever had at work. No one mentions the end of year bonus net of tax 6 months after year end. They'll talk about the handwritten note, they'll talk about the customized gift that was just for them. They'll talk about the shout out in the team meeting, or we know this stuff, and yet we don't deploy it when we come to design our approach.
Yeah, it reminds me of remember that segment we did a while ago, Nolan, where Chamath on the All In podcast said HR should not exist. And I actually don't care about that. I don't feel strongly that HR should or shouldn't exist, but I do feel strongly that if it doesn't, the work exists. And I think that's what we're talking about, are these labels. And it doesn't really matter where it sits or what the org is called, that work does need to exist. And I totally agree with you, Lucy. I grew up as an HRBP. It's my DNA. It's what I've been doing for 25 years. And you can't just go to a weekend seminar and learn how to be a good HR. There's nothing in there that you can read and do. It's why when I coach HR leaders, I'm this is, whether you're good or not at this, is a sixth sense. It's not the five senses. It's a very nuanced, artful, right time, right place, right tone, and it doesn't really matter where it sits or what it's called. Some of my leaders, they don't even call me by a title. They just call me say my name. You know what I mean? So,
and I think we can get so obsessed with titles in HR, can't we? I'll often get, God, why are you called disruptive HR? HR is such an old-fashioned term, and it's don't worry about the label. Think about the contents, get the contents right. And the label, it doesn't matter. Should we call it head of people experience? Should we call it people and culture? I think only teams that are anxious and lack confidence are worrying about what they're called. Similarly, teams that individuals who lack confidence are worried about a seat at the top table, and they get very anxious about that positional power. I've been on boards and not on boards, and it hasn't made one iota of difference to how well I could influence. It's all about the relationships. It's all about that judgment call that you described.
So you have 140,000 people that follow Disruptive HR on LinkedIn, which is an amazing community. What are you hearing from that community right now? What are they saying about what's top of mind for them?
The DEI thing is big.
Can you elaborate?
So concerns about kind of where it goes. Is there a kind of pushback post the Trump administration? Is this a kind of, is this a worry? Is this something we should be concerned about? By the way, where I stand on that is that I think some of the chief execs have been perhaps blatantly opportunistic about using this to roll back on things they didn't agree with in the first place. But equally, I think D&I can be done so differently. And again, it's all about relationships and the conversations. It's not about policies and process and compliance and targets. So I think actually we can use it to reset. So that's a biggie. AI, huge, obviously. But I think it varies between those organizations and HR teams who have embraced it and get it and have a bit of budget and are loving it, and the vast majority of HR people who are going, whoa, I don't even know where to get started with this, and it's confusing and I'm not sure where it can go. But AI is very loud. It's, you go to conferences or whatever. It's the, it seems like it's the only topic. Fortunately, I think the kind of human-centric design of HR is coming through, using agile techniques, using marketing techniques to use, things like employee persona and customize the experience. That's interesting. And I think that's a biggie that's coming through. And then it's the old stuff that's still there. Like, what do we do about managers who shouldn't be anywhere near human beings? It's like they didn't want to be people managers, and we've still got them, and we're still having to deal with them. So there's this real dichotomy. On the one hand, it's like super sexy AI futuristic stuff, And on the other, it's like, how do I get them to have a conversation with their team? It's, and maybe in the end, they'll meet in the middle, maybe in the end, AI will enable it.
On the DEI thing, so I was at Transform last week, and one of the panels mentioned a new acronym that I hadn't heard, which was JEDI, which is Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And I actually think like a lot of people in HR, I think that's actually the thing. David Hanrahan once said this, which is, somebody in his organization was like, we need to care more about social justice. He's like, we're running a business. Like, so when you say that it's not about, when you think good DE&I is not about policy, but is instead about conversations, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, just by the way, I think, having another acronym is the last thing we need.
I totally agree.
That's like really not doing us any favors at all. So let me give you the Atlassian example. So they were looking at how they could improve the conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion, because they found that there were people who were very vocal, who were interested, and there were those who were probably the ones in power in the majority that were feeling a little bit either anxious about it, don't want to say the wrong thing, don't want to upset someone, or were thinking this has got nothing to do with me. So the conversations were struggling. A lot of feelings weren't being addressed, a lot of thoughts weren't being aired, people were getting shouted down. And so they changed the conversation. They said, look, let's stop talking about minority groups and how do we get more ethnic minorities or women or whatever it is. Let's instead talk about how do we build more balanced teams. So it was a way of taking the language into something that actually we can all agree with. Have you seen that Accenture Inclusion Starts With I? It's a great video on YouTube, and it was a video that they did that's very simple, very powerful. But it's just about, you've got, white middle-aged men talking about what inclusion or exclusion means to them as well. We've got to find a way of opening up the conversation, giving it more acronyms, focusing more on unconscious bias training and so on. I don't think it's going to work. It's small little tweaks. It is enabling a conversation that doesn't alienate and frighten people. It is about small little nudges that we can do at the point where people are making decisions. It's not putting people on diversity training, mandatory diversity training, really. It is about being smarter about how do you change things very slowly, which are so ingrained and so deep rooted. This is not a quick fix. This is small. So Nestle, they said, instead of talent reviews being about asking the question, who are your brightest and best? Who are your stars? So unconscious bias has already kicked in. And then perhaps the HR director's trying to challenge or query why there's not more people from different groups. They said, look, we're going to start a different conversation, which is that you come to the talent review with the assumption that everyone in your team is ready to do something different, not get promoted, but do something different. Come to be prepared to talk about everybody. So it's just small things, none of which in and of itself is going to change things dramatically. But I do think the answer lies in keeping a conversation going that is open and doesn't alienate people. And I think the risk is that we're seeing a polarization. And for those organizations who are still very pro DEI, there is the risk that a lot of the conversations just go underground, and that's not going to change anything.
It's kind of like what we were just talking about with the HR business partner role, right? Changing the title or the letters or the labels doesn't cut it. Sometimes it can hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, just, is it an other thing? Is it a separate role? Or is it actually just part of creating an environment where people can do their best work? And that's HR to me.
Yeah. In 2016, we had a DEI leader at the company I was at, and she left. I didn't backfill the job for that exact reason, and kind of got tomatoes thrown at me. And I was like, listen, let me talk to you in front of an all hands meeting about why I'm not going to backfill this role. and why I don't think it's any less important.
No, in some ways it's more important. It's more important, but it's equally important that, you know, middle-aged white guys feel that they have a voice. And I know that, you know, there's a view, well, they've had a voice for so long and they've had the majority and they've had the power. But ultimately, if we're going to change things, we have to engage with them. And I think there's a risk that we have ceased to engage, many of them.
Yeah, I also think we just need to start talking more about merit. Like we had Joelle on, Kelli, and I think the most salient point I've heard somebody make on this topic is like the ultimate goal is merit. And I feel like that word has been tarnished a bit because it's for whatever I actually don't understand. But I think the ultimate goal is merit. And so I feel like there is an opportunity for folks who care about this topic to like actually reframe it as like ultimately we want merit. And so if merit is the thing, like let's just talk about that and remove all of the other acronyms. And I think you can very quickly get people on board once you start talking about merit.
I think so. I think so.
Awesome. Well, Lucy, this was a blast. Thank you so much for the time. Where can people find you?
So best place is probably the website, disruptivehr.com, or they can connect with me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lucy.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.
HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment of Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.